Hello, Skin Angels, and welcome to the Skin Angels podcast. I'm Peter Leo, dermatologist, investor, and one of the founders of Skin Angels. Before we begin, a quick disclosure. Many of the companies we discuss are early-stage ventures, and I may serve as an advisor, investor, or collaborator with some of them. From time to time, other members of Skin Angels may also have financial interests in these companies. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It reflects our opinions and experiences as clinicians, scientists, and investors who care deeply about innovation in dermatology and skin health. Nothing discussed here should be considered medical advice, investment advice, or a recommendation to buy or sell any security. Our goal is simple: to explore new ideas, highlight promising technologies, and help connect the dermatology community with the people building the future of skincare and skin science. Thanks for being part of Skin Angels. Let's get started. Today, I get to talk to Elizabeth Edwards, founder and managing partner of H Venture Partners and co-founder and president of ZenZema. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. So H Venture Partners is a venture capital firm that has 50 million under management and invests at the intersection of biotech and consumer products. And back in 2022, we decided to shift our focus from the more traditional venture capital model of investing in outside brands, shifting to incubating brands in the microbiome space. And so ZenZema is our first incubated brand out of our venture studio. And ZenZema is an over-the-counter eczema brand that leverages our XRX technology, which has over 160 issued patents and about 14 years in development. And it's really focused on balancing the skin's microbiome to deliver powerful and lasting itch relief. So I came into this space as an investor, just really, interested in the emerging science. You have the Human Microbiome Project that had just published a bunch of findings, all of these scientists globally publishing papers and patents. And so we really just saw this groundswell of new science that just begged to be commercialized. And so our venture studio team decided to focus on eczema first.
That's incredible. And you've really taken a very active role. You've jumped in to run this company. Can you tell us a little bit about ZenZema and what was the problem that it was focused on and how you decided that this was a problem that you wanted to try to solve?
Yeah, so we spent actually several years really researching the microbiome and just fell in love with eczema because it's a category of broken promises. It's a multifactorial disease, but the microbiome has such a big influence in the eczema space. And so we're seeing all of this great science. But taking a step back, the big problem that we're trying to solve as a venture capital firm is that as human beings, we have lived for millions of years in one context, a world filled with microbial diversity, eating a variety of fruits and vegetables and, all this great prebiotic fiber, lean meats. And then today, we live in this relatively sterilized world where every surface, our skin, our home, our food, is treated with pretty strong chemicals. And it's that sterilization or lack of microbiome diversity that seems to be making us ill. And so, meanwhile, we've developed pretty potent, broad spectrum antibiotics that have been used, so widely in the last century and obviously saved a lot of lives, but also created some superbugs, so bacteria that are nearly impossible to kill. And so it was really this idea that, and this is one of the focuses of the World Health Organization, that antibiotic resistance is the greatest threat to humanity after climate change. And so for us, we just see this huge opportunity in the microbiome space to put capital to work to commercialize technologies that can really, help us all live healthier lives. And so, we were looking at studies and still are today, thousands of studies uncovering links between Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, allergies, eczema, asthma, depression, anxiety, cancer, heart disease, metabolic disorders like diabetes. And so all of these modern chronic conditions were being linked to microbiome imbalances. And some of them are more complex and some of them are more straightforward. And so when we looked at this, huge space of, all of the diseases that I just mentioned, eczema seemed to be one where with the right microbiome science, we could have a huge impact on the number one unsolved problem for consumers, which is itch. So our approach to the eczema market, but really to, all of the different areas that we're investigating is we find a consumer category where there is a huge and well-defined unmet need that is kind of similar to like a headache, right? Like I'm in pain. I need to solve this problem. There's nothing really on the market that's solving it effectively for me right now. Because we want to come in and be, the Tylenol or Advil kind of just like painkiller. Here you go. This is going to solve the problem. And eczema was one of these spaces where there's just this giant market. You have obviously a lot of, pharmaceutical money going into eczema as well. But this itch, just immediate and lasting itch relief, time and time again from our consumer studies was the unaddressed problem. And so we dove into eczema, both looking at the microbiome aspects, but also all of those other factors, the skin barrier, the genetic components. And what we found was actually, there are many, many different ingredients that have been studied. So we've actually launched 3 separate studies within the eczema space looking at every well-controlled trial done globally since the beginning of time, homeopathic, Ayurvedic, Chinese medicine, all of the, traditional wisdom that's out there, and basically pulled together unique ingredients to support all of these different aspects of the disease. But our hero product, this eczema itch spray, which is the only product that contains our XRX technology, that's really targeted at immediately and effectively balancing that microbiome. So as we look at, all of the other exciting spaces, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, we want to get there. Those categories are going to be a lot harder to get into because it's not quite like a headache. But with eczema, you have these beautiful unsolved problems that we've been targeting kind of one by one with each product in the line.
It's incredibly exciting. And I totally agree. The story of the microbiome driving disease has been just incredible. We've seen it go from sort of something that people had in the periphery. They thought maybe it's playing a role to now being a major driver of disease. And the Staph aureus story in atopic dermatitis and itch is really mind-blowing. It seems like it is a true driver of itch and inflammation. And thus it makes sense to directly target staph, which can be a true causative factor for this. So that brings me to the next question. So you understand the science, you have a target, you have an idea. How did you go about building the team, getting the resources, developing the product and the formulation? How did it all come together? Because that is easier said than done.
Well, yes, you said it. So our team comes mostly from Procter & Gamble. These are all industry veterans who have spent time on, big brands like Olay, but also creating new brands from scratch. So Betsy Bluestone, who's the managing director of our venture studio, was actually the managing director for 5 years of Procter & Gamble's venture studio, with great brands like Zevo and Spruce and some of the, new blockbusters that P&G has come out with. And Betsy and I had independently for years, just, in 2020, 2021, we're seeing a lot of the same brands and technologies coming out that are kind of focused on utilizing microbiome science in consumer products. We're a bit different because we start with the capital. We have a $20 million fund that's focused on creating about half a dozen brands in the microbiome space. So we start with the capital, but then we look for the problem. And then once we are focused on the problem, we go out and source the technology. And that can take years. And in this case, it certainly did. And then once we have the right technology targets, we form a team around that and start building the brand. And that really starts with consumer insight. And so one of the things that I have really come to appreciate in the consumer space, I worked on Tylenol when I was a consultant at Deloitte, looking at, different new form factors for J&J in the oral dosage space. And there we were using, technology that's like $300 million. People don't realize how much technology actually goes into consumer products. They have to work. They have to be affordable. You think about the difference in price between a pharmaceutical drug and a consumer product that you can get at CVS or Walgreens. I mean, they can be 1,000 times, different in terms of price. And so being able to create something that really works, is really safe, because in order to be OTC, you have to be really safe, but then can be manufactured for pennies or a few dollars, because that's really the margin profile that you're talking about in the consumer product space. And so it really does take these great industry veterans to be able to put together those products that deliver on the promise, and products that are communicated in a way that consumers really respond to. One thing that's really interesting, and we joke about this all the time in our branding group, our design firm comes up with different concepts, 10 different beautiful packaging designs. And, Betsy and I will be drawn to one or the other. But then we put it in front of 1,000 consumers with eczema. And we say, which one? Right. It's that kind of just constant test and learn. And so there's a lot of science to branding that I think also people don't necessarily appreciate when you're walking the aisles of the grocery store. If you're talking about big brands, those products, every piece of messaging, every design has been very, very well tested so that consumers know, oh, this works, right? Or this is going to solve my particular problem. And so we've got a team of about 12 folks at this point, many of whom are fractional, but they're all kind of experts in their various spaces. And so we really rely on them to help us bring products to market.
Well, I really appreciate you calling that out, because one area that I've been obsessed with in the past few years, and increasingly so, is exactly what you talk about, this over-the-counter market, sometimes called dermocosmetics. I feel like the European market refers to it as that, but I'm trying to coin a new term. I call it active dermatologic care, ADC. And this is the tremendous investment, technology, innovation that we see in over-the-counter products that people sort of take for granted, don't realize, and we get all the spotlight put on drugs, which are amazing and often do lead the way, but we are seeing a huge amount of innovation in this cosmetic space or over-the-counter space. And I think we have to recognize that it's not just cosmetic. These are often very active, as we're seeing here with ZenZema. This is really doing something, and it is not just a feel-good product. It actually has an effect on patients and their symptoms. So that's really important. And it sits in that sort of betwixt and between zone. It's not really a drug, but it's not just a moisturizer or just a cooling sprayer.
Well, and you nailed it. I mean, keep in mind, a lot of these drugs are derived from, different botanicals, right? So this has been, thousands of years where human beings have said, oh, it seems like when I take this herb and I, make it into a salve, suddenly I'm having this effect. And then fast forward, 100 years later, somebody will figure out, oh, it's this particular part of the extract. And then, sort of riffing off that scientifically, whether it's, for cost or, safety or stability or other properties that they're trying to engineer. And so when we look at the pharmaceutical space, really our goal is to compete head to head with pharma in terms of efficacy. But it's that safety profile. So I think one of the things that is unique about the microbiome space, if you look at phase 1 trials for microbiome bases, so I'm talking about active probiotics and whatnot, topicals, what we're seeing is that the safety profile for those drugs is beating out the safety profile, for, just traditional pharma. I'm just going to group them all together. Microbiome based science, non-microbiome based science, just generally, 50% of phase ones fail because of toxicity. We don't see that in the microbiome space. So if you're using a natural live probiotic, what we're seeing is like, hey, we're getting great results without the black box warnings or, the sensitivities or whatnot. And why is that? So I think that's probably because we've grown up with bacteria from the beginning of time. And we're very, we're symbiotic. We have twice as many bacteria as we do human, genes in us and on us. And so we're quite used to, that relationship. And so from a safety profile, that's wonderful because we can take some of these, natural probiotics, we can take tabloids, etc. Basically, Mother Nature's way of keeping things in balance. Really seek to understand that and put that in a bottle that can be marketed OTC because it does have the safety profile. So that to me is sort of this exciting, intersection of all of the microbiome science that's, come out and is coming out, and this alternative pathway to pharma, which for many of our scientists, they're working on pharmaceuticals, right? They're going that direction. We approach them saying, hey, you have this capability. Could you work on this over here for us in the OTC space? Because we think this would actually be really powerful. And that's been a great partnership. And we've gotten to, know so many great institutions and, folks that have been working on these things for, 20, 30 years.
Well, you've gotten to climb that mountain because I'm excited to say you are shipping. The product is available now, which is so exciting. And my question for you here is, what is something you learned the hard way that others in dermatology or healthcare often underestimate? Were there some lessons you picked up along the way of bringing that product from an idea all the way to the market?
Absolutely. The first and foremost thing that I've learned in this is, through 20 years of investing in consumer brands, over 50 companies. One of my first consumer investments was Peloton. And that obviously did very well, 0 to 10 billion in 5 years. And that is an outlier, but one that you could see was going to be an outlier from the outset. And it all came down to the team. The founding team at Peloton absolutely had the particular skill sets and sets of experiences necessary to bring a product like that to the market and hyperscale it. And so when we've talked about our team, our team coming from Procter and Gamble, P&G alums, that's on purpose. P&G is the West Point or Harvard Business School of brand building. That's where you go to get your PhD in brand building. It's the largest consumer products company in the world. They really know their stuff. And they are very technology forward. They have more patents than Google, if you can believe it. And so a Pampers diaper has over 100 patents associated with it. Some of that's, the fluid technology. Some of it's a manufacturing technology. But that's when you really start to realize it takes a lot of knowledge and capability to compete in a market where margins are what they are, right? Where the, retailers have a big say in what goes on the shelf. The other thing that we've learned the hard way in the microbiome space is what works in the Petri dish doesn't necessarily work in a consumer product. And there are a lot of technical challenges to solve to get that great technology that's working in a lab to work in the real world. One example would be shelf stability. Putting live probiotics in a bottle and sitting it on the shelf at Target for, 2-3 years. That's not necessarily going to work. So, formulation challenges, bioavailability. What is the vehicle for this magic ingredient that you're putting in there. But I think the biggest disconnect between the biotech world and the consumer world is the cost structure. We can't use ingredients that are costing thousands of dollars a gram, and that's so typical for pharma. But that's too expensive to put in a formula. It would be too expensive, to sit on the shelf at Walmart, for instance. So it has to fit, within that consumer product, pricing scheme and within the category. So we're just constantly value engineering and making sure that we can deliver really great, efficacious products. So things where, the concentrations of our actives or, the activity of our actives is just blowing anything else, on the shelf out of the water, but still, within that acceptable price framework.
Well, I love the wisdom there too, because the older I get, the more I realize that it is the people, it's the team. A good team can take a bad idea and turn it around or find a new idea and make it work. But a bad team, even if they have the best idea, sometimes they just can't execute and they fumble it and you say, oh my gosh, what a waste. So speaking of the team, was there a moment when things started to come together, when you felt like, okay, this is actually going to take off here. Everything is really going to succeed?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, when we found our first technical partner in the space, we have many. So within ZenZema, we have a number of partnerships with leading researchers and institutions to really get, like I said, kind of every factor of this multifactorial disease. And we're starting with this microbiome imbalance and saying, look, we have a great advisor on our team, Dr. Isaac Chu from Harvard, who made the V8 protease link. So from staph, you get V8 protease, and that's what's creating the itch. That just I can't sleep, and I'm so uncomfortable itch. And so that first partnership where we said, okay, we have to create a hero ingredient that's going to get at the number one unsolved problem. And then we're just going to, sort of address problem after problem as we go. Then we have to get at inflammation and redness. We have to get at, skin barrier and actually skin healing, right? So that we're, and then prevention, what are the things that we can do in a supplement, for instance, that you're just not going to experience that terrible, cycle of flares. So it was really, I would say, the moment when Betsy and I, after, like I said, 3 different studies, we have a team of PhDs that are all experts in AI, and we literally boiled the ocean of every ingredient, every ingredient that had ever been tried for eczema, every ingredient that had ever been tried for itch, got this amazing scientific advisory board together and really said, okay, we think this is going to check all of the boxes. We're going to create this ingredient XRX that is going to be shelf stable where, for 2 or 3 years where we can put it on the shelf at Target. It's going to instantly balance the microbiome and get rid of itch. It was really, I would say, at the point of our clinical trial where we saw, the separation and, an itch where, placebo, not so much change, but then, folks that have been using XRX are really seeing that lasting itch relief where it takes a few hours to take effect, but then, man, it lasts, 12 to 24 hours. And so at that point we said, oh, now we have something, now we have a dog that can hunt, and now we need to figure out how to package it all up and brand it. But certainly clicking all those boxes, shelf stability, price, efficacy, and safety, right? So it's, there are always challenges, but you get your HRIPT results back and, zero irritations. Like there are many points where there's cause for celebration. And I would say then lastly, the most validating thing was just being at American Academy of Dermatology and seeing the excitement from hundreds upon hundreds of derms. We hoped that maybe we'd get 100 or 200 derms excited enough to try it in their office. And, just that conference, we had over 400 sign up to sample because it is so different, right? It's a spray for one. You can work it into, any regimen. So if people are on biologics, if they're on, topical steroids, whatnot, it might, for some, it might replace their topical steroids, who knows? But being a spray, the other really cool thing that we've seen is people that are not too excited about like the thick creams. This is something that's super easy. You can put it in your purse if you're, experiencing breakthrough itch, and a little spray goes a long way. So it was really just, I would say, the clinical trial was certainly our big, like, wow, we've got something here. This is great. But then what's hugely validating is when the market says like, oh yeah, I want to try that.
If you could go back to day one of the ZenZema journey, is there a piece of practical advice you would give yourself?
Ooh, go faster. Yeah, I mean the market is changing so quickly. We're just seeing, so many entrants and, both, pharma and OTC, in the space. And so, what that tells me is, the demand is really there. All of us, all of these companies, all of us would not be investing, so much money if there wasn't a real problem still to be solved. Clearly there is. I think that this being our first, we spent a lot of time perfecting, when we probably could have just ship it, just go. This is great. But yeah.
That makes me think of there's a quote that actually was from Wilkin, and it was a paper in the Archives of Dermatology in 1982. And I think about this all the time. And the quote is, in general, successful treatment of any disease is probably inversely related to the number of recommended regimens. So just as you say, when there's a ton of treatments, that means none of them really is meeting the need, right? Everyone keeps trying to find the right answer. So I love that you saw this. You realize it's not necessarily a saturated market. It's a market where there's still tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, it's an unsolved problem. And that's really what I love is when you have a category where people are clearly in pain and you have a real solution, for that pain. If you don't have that like clear problem, right? There are many markets that we've looked at where it's a big market, quote unquote, big market, but the problem is not as clearly defined. When we get, we've started looking at acne, and it's interesting, in the eczema space, the answer came back as a resounding, it's itch. It's rare to have that kind of consensus in a market that big. In acne, the consensus is actually not, as clear. There are, several concerns, in there defined. And so this is what I get really excited about is just, solving problems for people in a safe, natural, straightforward, elegant way that they can afford. If we can do that, we'll be successful.
Well, and you've already started to answer my last question, which is what's next? What do you see as the next big challenge or opportunity for you, for H Ventures, for ZenZema? Where are you looking?
Yeah, we are, now that ZenZema is launched, we're looking at a variety of different spaces. So acne and body odor are two topical areas that we're very interested in. So we're doing research there. It's interesting. Scientists just came to us with bacterial vaginosis, and right now we're validating market size. We're validating, consumer pain points. But some of the other areas that I mentioned that we're really interested in is this oral care link between oral care and longevity, oral care and Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. that one, I think it's going to be a tougher space to get into, but I think certainly the reward is there from a human standpoint. And then lastly, one that I'm really excited about. So actually our next project is actually an oral probiotic and prebiotic. And one thing that's not been, so widely understood is just how narrow the current probiotic market is. So when you look at all of the probiotics that are on the market today, the lactobacillus, the bifidobacterium, Akkermansia even, which is kind of the newest on the market with Pendulum. What's really interesting is the commercially available probiotics. So if you bought every single bottle of every probiotic manufactured globally, it represents 2% of the functional microbiome. So as we're taking, antibiotics because you have to, right? Or, I had pneumonia not too long ago. In some cases, you just have to do what you have to do. I was not wild about taking an antibiotic. I can't remember the last time I had to take an antibiotic, but things happen. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what is this going to do to my gut? What's this going to do to my overall health? So we're focused on antibiotic gut restoration next. And we have a set of probiotics that will be brand new to the market. This will be probably the largest investment in the probiotic space in the last 20 years. And we're covering the other 98% of the functional microbiome. So this is going to be pretty exciting because if we look at, the microbiomes of hunter-gatherers, they have 100 times more microbial diversity than we do. So, we are missing out on so many great things. And I think it's going to be huge also for longevity. So that's what's next.
Very exciting. We're going to definitely have to have you back as we get new developments. But Elizabeth Edwards, founder and managing partner of H Venture Partners, co-founder, president of ZenZema, thank you so much for joining us today. And to our listeners, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one.